Yes. And that number is the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration and Immigrants Rising updated one of those numbers. So initially it said a certain number of students graduate, 100,000 students graduating every year across the country. 4,000 of those are in New York State. That 4,000 is now 7,000 of those are in New York State. So more students are graduating from our high schools, or more students are also present in our high schools, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to go back to your question on that number, what is preventing students? It's like so many things that I'm like trying to figure out like where to start. But initially, it's why I referenced the importance of knowing Plyler v. Doe, is that there are significant assumptions that this population does not have access to resources. So why I always bring up Plyler v. Doe in those conversations is that some folks are still of the mindset that undocumented students can't even be in high school classrooms, that that's not something that's allowed, that that's against federal law or policy. So I think that also then ripples into other opportunities. So when students reach out to educators to ask, how can I go to college? And I hear this from my students who are graduating this year from college. So they've been here for 4 years in CUNY for 4 years. And so they attended high school about 5 years ago. Then the immediate reaction from their educator is, you can't go to college because you're undocumented.
You are now tuned in to the On Track with All My People podcast with your hosts, Amber Peters, A.K.A. Ms. P.
And Daytwan David, A.K.A. Dr. Change. Ain't nothing strange about it. A.K.A. Mr. David, A.K.A. Ayo Miss.
Oh my God, Daytwan, can we just start the show already?
Amber Peters, A.K.A. Ms. P. We are in a space where we have sprung forward, right? And in springing forward, we're thinking about growth, blooming, and all of these things. On the previous episode, you and I had a chance to kind of talk about that there are some populations of students that we're working with that we struggle with because there's so many things that we have to do and to figure out. And you, being a tech genius, but also somebody that like invests in knowledge, like you're going to all of the conferences, you're going to all of the spaces, and you recently went to one to help to kind of learn how to like close the gap in knowledge that you have. Tell us about like what you were able to go to.
Okay, so first off, I gotta shout out Marsha. Marsha is the gift that keeps on giving, y'all. So I gotta shout her out. But Marsha invited me and a bunch of other counselors to Hostos community college, where they had a counselor series. And so they do these workshops regularly where they expose you to a topic, give you information, resources, and also, obviously promoting Hostos as an option. But when I went the last time, the whole conversation was around undocumented students and students with, different immigration statuses. And it was like the most profound couple of hours that I've had, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think in training, right? Like I believe that we tend to go out and seek knowledge, right? I believe that about us, right? Like we are always looking for good workshops and things like that. We're always looking for the new research. We're looking for these things, but I think sometimes the scope is so narrow that you almost like miss you miss the point, right? And so like you have some of it, right? Probably like how Bridge always has this 80-20 kind of thing. You're
Right.
gonna know 80%. I don't even think I knew 80% of what was shared that day, right? And so most of the time they talked about financial aid options. They talked about different programs that exist within CUNY to support students who have this experience, right? But there was a particular presentation that
Mm-hmm.
blew my mind. Okay, and guess what? We got the person who presented. We got them here because I need answers.
For sure. Talk about it.
I need answers. And so she presented pretty much a presentation that explained all the different types of immigration statuses that students can have and some of the requirements that they have in order for them to secure their education. When I tell you there were things on that presentation, I said, hey, wait a minute. So when was somebody going to tell us this, right? When I tell you the room was like, a audible gasp by a lot of us in the room, like, what? Wait, hold on. When did this happen? Was this last year? Did y'all just put this into law? Like, we were so confused by some of the things that was there. Like, we all know, right? Like, there's money for undocumented students through, right, the HESC program. We know that there's a national scholarship for the Dream US scholarship. We know those things, right? But like digging deeper into who can get what, we was like, nah. So of course, what did I have to do? I was like, yeah, Marcia, I need you to do some introductions. I know I met her
What's your plug?
email,
Right.
but I need to be hooked in, locked in because we need her to come and give us some information. So
And she's here.
yeah.
And she's here. And I'm super, super excited. So excited that, you know what? I changed my name because I'm not the official doctor today. Right? I'm just going to be Just Change. I changed my name to
Oh,
Just Change
I was
because I
trying to
want to
read it.
I want to put respect on the doctor. But Ms. P, who are we on this show today?
Welcome to the On Track with All My People podcast. We are back and we have a great guest and a great show for you. And I'm here with Just Change now.
Just Change. Dates
Just
will
Change
improve
is
it.
something
Right.
strange about it because he was
Right.
Dr. Change last time.
Always Dr. Change. But I'm going to put respect on this because I'm not going to do the rapid thing with our guest today, right? Like, I feel like with our guest, we need to put respect on the doctor because I have
Oh,
some questions.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. So, introducing Dr. Cynthia Carvajal. Dr. Cynthia Carvajal is an academic professional and researcher focused on creating holistic action plan models to support undocumented immigrant and refugee students in K-12 and higher education. Currently, she serves as the director of undocumented immigrant student programs, CUNY, where she oversees and centralizes undocumented and immigrant student support programs across 25 undergraduate and graduate programs in the CUNY system. This position is the first of its kind in New York State and was created to support the undocumented and immigrant students throughout CUNY. Welcome, Dr.
Here
Carvajal.
we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
Hi
Welcome.
everyone. Thank you. Thank
Dr.
you for having
Carvajal.
me.
Thank you. I wanted to put respect. So I'm just changed today. You are the only doctor in this space. That's what I'm leading with. Amber, I want to give you a shout out. You're pushing through with your fake news anchor voice, but you're pushing through. And I really do appreciate it.
Y'all, I'm nursing. I don't know what I got, y'all, but I'm pushing through because this is important. This is
This
important.
is this is
We
important.
were supposed to be Dr. C squared. What happened?
I'm gonna go
Ooh,
back to it.
I like
Like,
it.
like once I add something of substance to this, I'm gonna make another name change. I'm gonna earn my doctorate
All right,
today.
all right, all
Dr.
right. Yes,
Carvajal.
yes.
Love it. Similar to the format of how we try to operate, we want to build in engagement and get a chance to learn about you. We know some things. We want to bring it into an activity. So we're going to do a rapid fire activity. I'm going to lead off. Basically, it's going to be a this or that, or it's going to be a question, and you are going to have 5 fingers to
Okay,
answer that question.
okay. All
There's
right,
no
all
penalty.
right.
Though. I don't know if there's a penalty. There's no penalty, but you're going to have five fingers to answer that question. Um,
Okay.
any questions for me
About the activity or
about
this
the
or that?
activity?
No, I think I got
Okay,
it.
we're
Okay,
good. We're good.
okay,
Okay, this one is a triple, so I'm gonna give you 6 fingers.
okay.
You'll understand this in a second. New York, Los Angeles, Arizona. Choose one. Ooh,
Oh, that face.
ooh, I didn't do the fingers.
I
Pressure.
know. Um, I'll say New York.
Okay. Do you want to give us a reason?
Yes. New York feels freer
Mm,
in a lot of ways, both in like ability to move without needing a car.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think also in the food that is available. Like Arizona has good, like really good Mexican food, and so does LA. But in New York, I can find good Korean, Japanese, Malaysian. And then I was just talking to my friend about this too the other day, but I think, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I think it feels freer in that, in like movement and in food selection.
Well, it's interesting. You're going to find another question that we're going to ask about
Okay.
Arizona. I was hoping you could give more love to Arizona. I have a soft spot in my heart for Arizona. I worked in Yuma, Arizona for a little
Oh,
while,
okay.
doing a pilot program. Loved the work there, but also tasted authentic, not Chipotle, but authentic Mexican food like tostadas. I'm in love with tostadas in Arizona. And
Yes.
what's the next one?
Said in Arizona,
The
not New York.
the wheat in Arizona is better. That's why
Okay.
tostadas are better. That's why tortillas and pan dulce are better in Arizona. But there is 1 week every year where it's over 100, almost 120 degrees.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as I thought about putting Arizona, I was like, I can't do the week. I can't
That's
do
not my ministry.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
say this really quickly. I told this story to friends a long time ago. I had a friend that was living in Phoenix, and it was hot. It was in like the summertime, and then she took me to a hot yoga class, and it was like the
I
worst
feel you.
experience.
That's attempted murder.
Crazy, crazy. Amber,
Just go outside and do yoga. There's
Right.
an oven already.
Attempted murder. I was your
100%.
friend. Okay, next question.
Okay.
Favorite holiday?
Favorite holiday?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, probably Dia de los Muertos. Yeah, I can't. I think all the other holidays feel really consumption heavy. Like you're like supposed to like. I just realized that Easter is coming up because like I went to like a CVS and there's like chocolate on sale.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like I see like giant inflatable bunnies and I'm like, oh, that's right, that's coming up. And so all of them feel really consumerist. And so I think Dia de los Muertos is the only holiday that feels grounding because there's like a celebration of past life, but also like an acknowledgement of death and a celebration of what that means as well. So I think that feels grounding in a way that other holidays just don't. Yeah. Yeah.
And I
That's-
like
that's
that there is a day to commemorate, right? Like the souls who have
Yes.
been here, right? The souls who have
Yeah.
gone that like gave you something, right?
Yeah.
Like, you get to honor them in a special way. That's
Yeah.
pretty dope.
Love that.
Yeah.
All right, this is now survival. So you have to think about survival. All right, rattlesnakes or tarantulas?
Tarantulas that I would survive, right?
Yeah.
Tarantulas. Yeah, I wouldn't mess with the rattlesnakes.
Interesting.
Amber had a
said-
different opinion.
I had said the rattlesnakes because you can hear them before you see them.
Sometimes you cannot.
Ah.
Amber, you about to play yourself.
Yes, when I lived in the desert and was like house sitting there, I had just gone to buy groceries and I came in and out of the house like 3 times, like slamming the door, like all these things. And then I saw something at the corner of my eye move, and it was a pot that was holding a plant. A massive rattlesnake was like curled up there, and I screamed and ran into my car.
I love New York.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and I didn't realize it until later that there were some road runners that were poking at that plant, and it's because I think the rattlesnake was so old that it was dying, and the road runners were trying to eat it. And so when I arrived, they had like maybe like were picking on it or something, but I didn't get all that until the very end. But I from my car, I grabbed the water hose and started spraying at it for it to move. And I got a video of it like slithering out to the back of the house. And I sent that video to a friend who has lived in Arizona like all her life. And she's like, that is the biggest rattlesnake I've ever seen in my entire life. Like that thing must have been ancient. And so I didn't hear it at all because it was probably sleeping and just trying to like die in peace. And I like sprayed water at it. But sometimes you can't hear it. Sometimes it's just.
Oh no.
Wow, like yeah. Dios los muertos for the rattlesnake. That's crazy.
I know. I should have honored it.
That's great. Oh wait, and road runners are a real thing. I'm not even gonna go there. I'm gonna research. That's a real thing.
Yes.
I'm gonna research. I'm gonna research.
Now I really have to go research.
Mind
They are
blown.
real.
Okay, house party or a party at a club lounge?
Oh. I guess house party if I had to pick. I'm like not super into parties, I think. I feel like I would like maybe like a housewarming party. That would like something chill with like folks just kind of relaxing. I think when I think party, I think like music, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm too old for that now. Like I'm just like, let's just eat like cheese and and like sit and listen to music.
It's like, let's relax.
So in thinking about music and eating the cheese, the aged cheese, um, old school music from your culture or modern music from your culture?
That's so tough because the music I listen to now is right at the right at that intersectional point of both of those. So I think immediately of Natalia Lafocarde and Julieta Venegas that have that like old school sound, but they're more modern in their take.
Mm,
But I have to pick one.
yep.
I think modern. I think the modern sound hits. I think different. Yeah.
Got you. And Amber, I bet you can't spell either of those names she said.
No. But
That's okay.
try.
I did say them pretty fast, so that's okay.
You want that authenticity for sure.
Surviving the desert
Uh-huh.
or surviving the underground subway after midnight.
No, I'll survive the desert. I got that. I feel like animals are predictable, but people are not, and the train is not. So I don't know when it's gonna get there.
Yeah.
Like the National Guard is down there now too, and I'm like, I can't.
Oh yeah.
I
It's
can't.
getting crazy here in New York. I'm like, somebody left some information out.
Yeah, something's happening. I don't know what's happening.
Not right.
No.
Terrible. Okay, with all the craziness, people need to get into a space where they can find peace. What is your top comfort food? Comfort food.
Comfort food?
Mhm.
It's always boba. Like
Okay,
100%. But
Dr. Carvajal.
I only go to 2 boba spots in New York.
Tell
And
What
us.
are they?
that's 50 Len, which there's one in Koreatown and another one in Union Square, and a new one called Heya Tea. And those
Okay.
two are like I don't do Kung Fu Tea House. I don't do what's the other one called? Quickly. Only those 2.
So y'all
What
heard
is
it here. If y'all want a boba, y'all know where to go.
you're gonna go there? But what is the and this is not a good use of your degree, so I apologize. What is the 30-second breakdown of boba? I cannot comprehend what.
Okay. So it's tea. So whatever tea you like, if you like tea, but you add milk to it. Or sometimes you could also add cheese foam to it to make it a little milkier. So that's where it becomes milk tea. And then the boba balls themselves it's tapioca and sugar, just kind of like bunched up into little balls, and then you can chew on them. So you're basically chewing sugar almost. But it's
Okay.
not nearly as sweet as sugar because they're made of tapioca.
I tell you what, if I drink that boba tea with all that lactose you mentioned, I would not survive any train. I wouldn't survive anything. So I'm gonna skip the boba, and I'm gonna let you hold that and have that. Dr. Kava, we're super happy that you're joining us and sharing your expertise in this space. A part of the reason that this is important to me is because similar to Amber, both of us have parents that have migrated to the country and have to deal with like challenges very young. And it was but so much of my father's story that I was able to bring into professional spaces because the landscape was consistently changing and things were getting worse. Policies were being enacted and sort of like also it's almost like policies being brought into platforms or were not taking into account the people that it was affecting. It was more so like, here's a vote, here's a speaking point, and then let me just move on, right? So that was super challenging to deal with, especially in the field with me connecting with students whose lives are impacted by this. So we wanted to kind of talk about, just sort of like your work, what is happening, and how can we learn in this particular space of On Track for All My People. We are trying to, one of the things we're doing is like elevating the like consciousness of what is happening. So you're going to add a phenomenal lens to this. I watched the video of you because you're, of course, a big deal. And so I watched the video, and it was a video in 2020. You led a presentation. It was called Learn, Act, and Advocate. Is that correct? Did I make that up?
No, yeah, that's When I was
Okay.
working at the CUNY Initiative on Immigration and Education.
Yep. I'm doing my work, Amber C. It was supporting undocumented students from K-12 to college. And a couple of things that I took that you had in the presentation. You were talking about wanting people to learn about the barriers in education facing undocumented students, the action that educators should take in their roles and resources needed, and then what advocacy should look like, especially with continued learning.
Yeah.
You also like framed that we need to understand the importance of Plyler versus Doe, and just understanding just like basis. Everyone should have access to equal education, regardless of educational status, but that was only limited to K to 12. And the most profound thing that I saw that you put up there was you had like a data pyramid, right? Where you were talking about the amount of students, undocumented students in the country every single year. So 2.5 undocumented students in the US. Out of that, 123,000 seniors are undocumented each year. 100,000 graduate high school every year. 32,000 of that enroll in college every year. And only 1,950 students graduate from college each year. I wanted to know if you can spend, yeah, that's the numbers. And that was in 2020. I don't know what has happened with since the pandemic, right? There's new challenges, maybe new opportunities, but certainly both can be true. Can you spend a few minutes helping us to understand two numbers? What is affecting only 32,000 students enrolling in college each year after 100,000 are graduating?
Yes. And that number is the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration and Immigrants Rising updated one of those numbers. So initially it said a certain number of students graduate, 100,000 students graduating every year across the country. 4,000 of those are in New York State. That 4,000 is now 7,000 of those are in New York State. So more students are graduating from our high schools, or more students are also present in our high schools, right?
Mm.
But to go back to your question on that number, what is preventing students? It's like so many things that I'm like trying to figure out like where to start. But initially, it's why I referenced the importance of knowing Plyler v. Doe, is that there are significant assumptions that this population does not have access to resources. So why I always bring up Plyler v. Doe in those conversations is that some folks are still of the mindset that undocumented students can't even be in high school classrooms, that's not something that's allowed, that's against federal law or policy. So I think that also then ripples into other opportunities. So when students reach out to educators to ask, how can I go to college? And I hear this from my students who are graduating this year from college. So they've been here for 4 years in CUNY for 4 years. And so they attended high school about 5 years ago. Then the immediate reaction from their educator is, you can't go to college because you're undocumented, when that's completely incorrect, right? It's not even a note of you can't go to college because it's too expensive and there's no money for undocumented students. It's simply you cannot go to college. So I think that's the biggest hurdle, is just misinformation and misconceptions from folks who are at the front lines of supporting this population. And then we get into the policy of it all, right? So how in-state tuition policy that exists is not broad enough for this population, especially a population like New York, where in states like California and Texas, the migration age is like, on average, it's below the age of 16. It's you're coming in at a younger age. You've been here for a couple of years now, but in New York, it's a lot more recent arrivals. And so that the in-state tuition policy doesn't account for that necessarily. New York State Dream Act policy doesn't account for that necessarily. And I think without kind of just hitting on high school educators as it relates to like their misinformation on this, it's also at CUNY. Like I'm so often correcting, educating, and informing my peers and my colleagues on how undocumented students can access resources, or even just what resources exist. So I would say, like, without honing in on any of those are kind of the biggest barriers, and why so few students make it into college. Depending, this is all New York, right? But if we're talking about like states like Georgia don't permit undocumented students from enrolling in their colleges. So that's why that happens as well, right? Versus states like California that have much more robust systems at place. And even Texas has more robust systems at place. Yeah.
So going back to what you said about like your work at CUNY where you're having to inform your peers, can you tell us more about the work that you're doing at CUNY and like how are you kind of getting everybody on board? Because I know for us, especially any educator watching this, if you had to deal with anything in the CUNY system, right? There's a lot of inconsistencies.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering how your work is tying everybody in, like bringing everybody in to be like, hey, this is what we have and this is what kids can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you hit it right on the point, the inconsistencies of it all. So prior to this position, and prior to my work at the CUNY Initiative on Immigration and Education, I was the inaugural director for the Immigrant Student Success Center at John Jay College. And that's the first center of its kind in the state of New York. And to give you kind of a little bit of context, California has, I think, 42, because the state requires that each public university have an undocumented student resource center. And so they have 42 across the state, not including the private universities. And then New Jersey has one, Arizona has one, Texas has three, and New York, this was the first. And so in that position, not only was I building the center there, but I was also helping students from other campuses figure out how they can navigate CUNY. And so kind of a couple years passed, and then this position that I have now at CUNY Central was created to centralize the resources that exist so that there aren't these inconsistencies, right? So some campuses will distribute private scholarships to undocumented students. Other campuses believe that they can't. Some campuses, their SEEK programs permit undocumented students to participate if they submit TAP and through the New York State Dream Act. Other campuses believe that is not real, that doesn't exist. And so with my position, then I'm able to centralize guidance for the campuses. I'm able to advise in some policies that kind of come forth to make sure that they're inclusive of undocumented students. And I'm also, my role is to create resources and guidance for the campuses so they can more clearly communicate what is available. So I referenced this in the presentation, Amber, that you attended, that there is no clear guidance on in-state tuition and state aid. And so I created a worksheet on it. And I mentioned in the presentation that it was being developed. And so it was finalized finally. And I'm able to share that because I've already begun sharing it because there really is no guidance on this, especially when there's so much nuance to each immigration status. So that's part of my role. And then my I'd say the goal that's really at the heart of the work that I'm doing is for every campus to have a center, because the campuses that have them, which are John Jay, Brooklyn, and City College now this semester, are really they're doing everything possible to support their undocumented student population, which is still a lot of work, versus the campuses that don't have a center. And so their students are really struggling to stay enrolled and to do well in their campuses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned the goal and the heart of the work, and this helps with this next question that we have. You can clearly hear that this is both purpose and passion for you in terms of the work that you're doing, right? It's not just about the check. I'm sure that it helps with getting the boba, though, right?
It's expensive.
You're pretty fancy with the boba. But I'm curious about this. Like, is there something in your life that has informed the way that you do your work and why you do your work? So, for instance, I'll speak about my story, Amber, I won't share yours. There was a point in time where, friends in college were just like, hey, we are not sure if you're going to graduate.
Hmm.
And it wasn't because I did not like school. I love school. Like there was for almost 12 years, I think I had perfect attendance. Like it wasn't like I did not like school. It was mostly like I needed more guidance on how to really actualize my own plan, right? So there wasn't anybody that was really there. I think I had support for sure. But the support needed another level of information, I think, to connect to what I think I was dealing with, right? Which is like, hey, I'm being told to do this thing, but I'm exploring these other, like, I want to be in the community. I want to do this other work. And, coming from, certain households, it's like, there's no money there, right? Like, so I know why I do the work that I do now as a youth development specialist and connecting with students. Is there something like that for you and why you do this work and how you actually show up to the work?
Yeah. So I was born, I have a personal connection to this. I was born in Mexico and I immigrated to East LA, California when I was 5 years old. And we came on a tourist visa, and then that visa after a year expired, which is a really common experience for a lot of folks who are undocumented. Is they arrive on a visa and it expires, and the only option really is to stay. Like there may not be opportunities back home. And so we were undocumented. All throughout my high school experience, I was undocumented, and a lot of that was this like balance of who do I share information with and who do I not share information with. And I remember like even really clearly my dad telling me not to speak Spanish in school because then folks would assume that I immigrated here. And so it was a lot of like focus on learn English in school and we'll teach you Spanish over here at home. And so, but I think navigating all of that undocumented added another layer to it where I needed to figure out who actually would be able to advise me on how to go to college if I was as an undocumented student. And this was California, but back in 2005 to 2009. So those were the high school years. But when I immigrated, Governor Wilson was the governor there. And he was very anti-immigrant. So he passed a legislation in California that required public school educators to report undocumented students in their classroom. And it was chaos, right? Like students were not attending, there was a lot of fear, but that was immediately struck down because of Plyler veto, right? And so that's why it's so important too. But I navigated high school undocumented. A lot of it was like you have to apply for scholarships. Like that's really the only option. You can qualify for in-state tuition because of the AB 540 legislation in California, but you're really limited to what is available for you. And then my father, without kind of going into too much detail, very much by luck, which is often how folks experience it, my father was able to adjust his status through his remarriage. And we were able to be included in that because me and my sister hadn't turned 18 yet. But had we turned 18, we wouldn't have been able to be included. And so life would have been very different for me and for my sister and for my family. And so I was able to adjust through that right before college applications were due, right before financial aid applications were due. And so that really changed what I had access to when I was in college. I got FAFSA. It was like fully covered. I was able to live in the dorms. And my friends who were still undocumented were commuting from East LA to UCLA. We're commuting and like having to find scholarships and working part-time in the evening. So I think it was that juxtaposition that enforced that there really weren't any resources available for undocumented students at higher education spaces. And so I continued to focus in that work. I did a lot of research in that work. I worked in I provided after school classes to my high school on how undocumented students can apply to colleges, and just continued to do that into my master's program, into my PhD program, and then into the space as well, because I think it's like a combination of this personal experience. And I think what I'm also interested in is coming from California and having experience in Arizona. I'm always interested in helping to introduce institutions of power to what is possible. Because I think often the reaction is, oh, well, we don't have the support to do that, or I can't even imagine what support could look like. But there are other spaces with examples. And that's also why I mentioned that California has 42 centers and New York just has 3. Like what does that look like when we're supposedly a city of immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. That's often what is being uplifted. So I think like a culmination of all of that is what makes this work feel like important and personal. And the last thing I'll say too is like immigration, like the immigration experience within families doesn't just stop when someone has adjusted status. And so what I mean by that is, like, I have family members who have just recently immigrated, and so they're still undocumented. And I've been helping them apply for college. I've been helping them navigate their institutions in their states, and there's still so much more work that needs to be done. So I think that's and it's so much work that needs to be done. And this work, unless there's immigration reform, will continue to need to be done. Like it won't stop because suddenly there's an amnesty act. Suddenly there's something available. There needs to be comprehensive immigration reform. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that. Like just in thinking about what's possible, right?
Yeah.
You've seen what's possible in all these other states, and being able to like bring that here to New York. To your point, right? We're supposed to be the melting pot, right?
Right.
Right. We're a nation of immigrants, and we don't have, proper resources or we have the resources, but we are not sharing
Yeah.
those resources with others.
Mm.
So like in thinking about, right, like some of the issues that you brought up around, right, being undocumented, right? Like there's all these things, there's legislation, right? There's, not knowing where the resources are, the common misconceptions that will like put somebody out. What other, like, what are top three, like if you had to name top three issues that undocumented students are facing, like what are those three that we can like lift up and be like, hey.
And I think to add context to that, let's put it within, because that can go broad. Let's put it in the context of trying to get students access to college.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I turned off the camera because I thought I froze for a second, but maybe not. Okay. I think the top three issues with helping students get access to college. One, okay. In a world where like everyone at the very least, at the very minimum, says yes, you can go to college, and doesn't just outright like remove them from the pipeline. Number one is accessing in-state tuition in the state of New York. And I know I talk about this a lot because as students reach out to my office, this is kind of the biggest hurdle, where if they don't qualify for in-state tuition, the student often does not enroll because it's just too expensive, right? And so in-state tuition is complicated in New York because if you're undocumented, you have to have 2 years of high school in the state of New York and graduate or get a GED. But many students don't have the 2 full years of high school. They're like streamlined into 1 year and then they graduate. And if they graduate and report that high school degree with only 1 year in New York State, they will forever never qualify for in-state tuition unless they adjust status. And this is in comparison to U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, folks with DACA, with TPS, with some kind of valid status, who, if they just have 12 months of residency in the state of New York, they qualify for in-state tuition. So that's like a huge hurdle. You have to have like been here for 2 years and attended high school, or you're here for 12 months, right? The difference is really stark. And while this legislation was initially based off of California and Texas, which have similar criteria, the difference is that California had the hindsight to expand that eligibility to, if you attend, I think it's like if you attended 1 semester of classes at a community college, you can now qualify for in-state tuition after that. There's also like other ways to expand it, but I'm not super familiar with them. But I think they're looking beyond the population that's currently here and seeing who may be coming afterwards. And that's missing in New York. Like it's like legislation has passed and we're done. And
this was one of the things that came up that everybody was like,
right,
we were in the
right,
room like,
right,
when was anybody gonna? Because like at this point, when you are supporting a student, especially like right now, is the time where kids are going to be picking colleges and figuring
yeah,
out money and everything like that. There is like you can miss an opportunity to really support a child right now because you didn't know that.
exactly, yes, and then and misinform a child too, right? So students may think, oh, I should just report my high school diploma because I've graduated. But in these cases, if they only have 1 year of high school and they want to graduate from high school, it might be better to just get a GED and not report the high school diploma, because otherwise CUNY will have that forever, or SUNY will have that forever, and students won't be eligible. Um, I did, without getting too much on a tangent, I did kind of want to note the the arbitrariness of some legislations. So New York was actually the first state to provide in-state tuition to undocumented students in the 80s, right? Like it was like free, like in-state tuition, like that, available for anybody. Then 9/11 happened. And then they said, okay, no more in-state tuition if you're undocumented or you're an immigrant. And so students protested, educators protested, and they brought it back in 2002. And so I say that because that was a time of a lot of xenophobia, a lot of like anti-immigrant sentiment, along with a lot of other targeting of groups. And so the legislation may not have been written the way that it would have been if it was a different time period. And so I think that's where like that makes the case for the legislation to be updated, to be reviewed, to be renewed again. But that's the first. And I think the second biggest barrier is financial assistance. Like it's the New York State Dream Act is just as complicated as in-state tuition because they have similar requirements. So it's again 2 years of New York State high school and graduation, or a GED, or you're being charged in-state tuition for, they say for any reason other than residency, but it really just means you're being charged in-state tuition, and you can show us a tuition bill that says that. And even if students are able to like fully navigate this two-part application process, because you have to submit the New York State Dream Act eligibility and then submit the TAP application, the amount of award that you can get is minimal. It's like tuition.
Cover the whole thing.
Right. Tuition is maybe like 8,000 at a 4-year campus, 7,000, 8,000. The most I've seen students get is 5,000, and those are also very few cases that I've seen. Like most students get like about 1,000, 2,000, and that's not enough. That's not enough to cover tuition. And then similarly, TAP, because anything that students would have access to is based off of the TAP legislation. TAP was initiated so long ago, and so much of the legislation is still under those metrics. I talked about this in the presentation, that if a student applies for the New York State Dream Act and applies for TAP and they're independent, if they make more than $10,000 a year, independent, no kids, no partner, they are no longer eligible for TAP.
It's crazy.
More than $10,000.
What are you supposed to do with that?
And it's because
in New York.
Right. And it's because those guidelines were set when TAP was created, which was, I don't even know when, like back in the 80s, like
it is 2024.
Right. And that's if you're independent, no kids, and like single. I mean, even if you're independent, have children, or are in a partnership, that number only goes up to 40,000. Like it's not possible. Like it hasn't been modernized. Like it hasn't been updated
at all.
Yeah. And outside of the New York State Dream Act, scholarships I think are really difficult to get. Like a lot of students say, I apply, and I never hear back. And then the only other scholarship that is significant and can really make a difference in the student's life is the Dream.US scholarship. So that covers tuition fully. It gives you like a $750 stipend per semester. You qualify for a $4,000 internship opportunity. Like it's so many things. And the eligibility criteria is also really limited. You have to have been in the US before the age of 16. You have to have arrived before 2018. Like this is a population that is not folks who are recently arriving, right? Like they're not going to qualify for this scholarship. And so that's also really limited. The CUNY population in this scholarship is the largest of any other state. So I think we're really proud of that partnership and the benefit that they've provided our students. And then we're also kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen when students who have recently arrived begin applying to college. They're not gonna be able to navigate in-state tuition, and they might not be able to access the Dream.us scholarship.
So I'm wondering if they would, you know, revisit their requirements at some point.
I wonder if they will.
We're gonna put that out there, Dream.us. We like you, but we'd like you to revisit
Yeah,
things for us. Would
I
be
can.
nice. No pressure.
Yeah. So I remember there's a student that I supported that got the Dream.us scholarship, like changed her life.
Yeah.
And the thing is, though, she was already like a student that was already assimilated here. She was living here for years, right? And even for her, high performing, high achieving student, it was still a lot of things that needed to be done. Like it just seemed like there were a lot of barriers and hurdles. So you really needed to be able to kind of have like coach her through the process and coach her to what it means, and also like help her to believe that it was going to be something that was significant to making this an access point for her, right? Because in dealing with even with students that are actually here, some of the paperwork that students have to complete in order to get access to college is just like it creates an inherent barrier
Yeah.
altogether. So just imagine for students that are just arriving, have not been here this long, it seems like it's more of like something that's going to discourage them to complete it versus something that's going to encourage them.
Yeah.
I'm curious about so in thinking about that, staying along those lines, I know you've talked about in that the last video that I saw, deportation pipelines. We have media propaganda, disparaging policies, perception of scarce resources, and the reality of scarce resources. Like these represent systemic issues or things that perpetuate them, right? The potency of systemic issues. I'm curious of two questions. I'll ask the first one first, and then the second one after you're done. What do you feel has been the most progressive policy enacted that has affected change on undocumented students getting access to college and being able to persist?
Do you mean in like just New York State or federal?
Well, New York State, but I'm curious about the federal one as well because I know that New York, in at different points in times, has kind of taken the baton from what California was doing, or in some other like states. But I'm curious, I guess New York, and then also if you can speak about the federal one as well, if there's one that exists.
I can't think of one in New York.
Mm,
I think and I think maybe I'm defaulting to like comparing it to other states, and maybe that's what's
mhm,
blocking me from thinking of like a progressive legislation. Um, but the New York State Dream Act was enacted after 15 other states already did that, so it
mhm,
doesn't feel progressive in that way. In-state tuition, I mean, was also enacted after not that many states, but after several other states have already enacted it. Um, and I wish I could say that New York provides license and certification to anyone regardless of immigration status. I think that would be a really progressive legislation, but it hasn't. New Jersey has. I just got an email from a colleague in Washington State that Washington State will likely be doing it as well now that they're about to pass legislation on it.
mhm.
So I'm finding it really hard to think of progressive. Maybe I think the only one that I can say feels progressive is the driver's license legislation. Like I think that has provided access to state driver's licenses for folks who are undocumented. California has it already, obviously, and so do several other states. But my understanding is that California has a couple of barriers because their ID very clearly notes that this is for someone who's not a U.S. citizen, but New York's doesn't necessarily do that. So I think that in and of itself feels a bit more progressive. Um, but no, I struggle to think of something for New York. They're always last, it seems, on these type of
That's
things.
it's crazy,
Yeah.
considering what New York City represents. I often know that New
Right.
York City and New York State are two different places. And hopefully, people understand what I mean by that. Um, there has been for the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years a lot of like DEIB initiatives Are DEI initiatives at large addressing the needs of documented students? And if so, what way?
No, not at all. Like I can't point to any of those initiatives either as like professional development opportunities or in master's programs as addressing the needs of immigrant and undocumented students. Um, yeah, I can see it very clearly from educators not being sure how to advise or how to initiate like trauma informed practices in their curriculum or in their classrooms, or even just like language immersion, even just like immigrant centered resources. That all seems to be missing, um, which is I think why folks are looking and like understanding the need for these types of resources. Yeah.
Appreciate that. So I want to kind of connect to something that you said, and love for you to kind of speak about that. Well, Amber will kind of follow up possibly with it. You mentioned your father telling you not to talk in Spanish, right?
Mhm.
Like when you got here. I had a friend that was from South America who migrated to the country when we were probably like 10, fourth, fifth grade or whatever. And for like 2 or 3 years, she was super quiet, like super, super quiet. And we wound up going to like birthday parties. She was super reserved. When we got older into high school, she moved to a different city, and she told me, like we was actually in college, she told me that that was like a very scary time for them. Like their parents implanted to them, don't speak too much. Like it
Mm.
was a scary moment, a scary like do not reveal too much. And there has to be a crazy thing. Like I just realized, like, hey, her genuine personality was different from the person that I met those first 3 years. Um, so we wanted to kind of talk about like safe and safer places.
Yeah. Um, yes, and un- I think that's where making sure that educators are fully informed about undocumented students is so key, is because students are often having to make these like minute second decisions on whether a space is safe or not to share their immigration status to, whether an individual is safe or not to share their immigration status to. And I think that was really like at its height during the Trump presidency, because like folks' true colors were coming out and you weren't sure kind of who you could reach out to. Um, but I think that's where like spaces like immigrant student success centers and documented student resource centers are those safe spaces, because students are then able. I think what is actually a safe space for an undocumented student is a space where they don't have to talk about their immigration status in order to feel in community, in order to have resources. Um, as Yeah, I think that's what I would say. I don't know if there's anything like in particular related to that you wanted to talk through.
I think for me, like, just trying to think of, I'm a first, second, third year counselor, right? I'm working with a student who, right, maybe they haven't disclosed, but I'm kind of catching on that, right? Some things amiss. How do I create a safer space for that child? Like, what tips would you give me in like making sure I support them all the way through? Um, what would that look like for a counselor supporting a student?
Yeah, I think it means being the first person to to offer and to name these types of resources and even statuses. Uh, and what I mean by that is, and I say this often, is like normalizing the conversation, normalizing the resources, so that you're creating a space where students feel comfortable disclosing but aren't forced to disclose, right? Because I think so often in both K through 12 and in higher education, folks are like, can I just get a list of the students so I can email them directly about these resources and I don't have to like find them? But the point isn't to target students and reach out to them one-on-one. The point is, how can we, in the same sentence that we talk about a resource for a US citizen, also mention resources for undocumented students? So if you as a counselor are talking to a student and you're like, this student may be undocumented, I'm not sure, I don't want to ask them because that can make them feel uncomfortable, and I don't want them to have to out themselves for me to share relevant resources. So I'm just going to say, if you want to go to college, FAFSA can pay for it.
Hmm.
But the New York State Dream Act can also provide some support if you're undocumented, and then just move forward. because then that can communicate to the student, this person is informed, so I can reach out to them for more resources. Or this person is talking about my immigration status like it's something that everyone here should know how to advise. And so now I feel, okay, this space can feel safe because people know about these resources.
I've been trying to include stuff like that, like in a lot of my presentations. Sometimes I'll be like, "Hey, this may or may not apply to you, but like, you know, if you happen to be undocumented, there you can go to college, and here's how." And I always tell them, "Hey, if you have a friend that may have disclosed to you,
Yes.
you know, feel free to let them know they can go to college, just so that, you know, everybody doesn't feel like, oh, she's talking to me directly."
Yeah.
Now everybody has the same information. Do with it what you will. And I've noticed that kids will come to me like after the presentation and be like, "Hey, so I think I'm one of those kids you talked
Right.
about.
For
Yes.
sure.
More information
Yes.
about X." And that has definitely helped a lot.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Because I think, and like, again, this happens in all spaces, but folks are so like, I think they think undocumented folks live in a silo. Like their only family members are undocumented, their only friends are undocumented. But what I'll do something similar and I'll tell with folks, you might have neighbors who are undocumented. You might have family members who are friends who are undocumented. So you as a US citizen should also know this information. Just as you know what FAFSA is, you should also know what the New York State Dream Act is because it could apply to someone in your community.
Yeah.
For sure. You are a resource, and you also helped me recently to kind of understand a couple of really important things. Like for one, you through our conversation recently, I realized that undocumented students, they can get an LLC, right? Like, and they can start a
Yeah.
business. Like, I didn't know that that was a thing, right? So those that may want to choose that avenue as a way to like support their way through college or as a way to like survive, that was like super helpful. What are those other like what we say top two for you? Things that are misconceptions that can easily be like, hey, if you know this, you can help somebody that is of these different statuses to improve their livelihood.
Yes, I think one is definitely the working opportunities. Like which is like kind of the third barrier that I was alluding to that like prevents students from enrolling in colleges is that like when I get my degree, what am I going to do with it? Am I going to be able to work? Like what's the point of it? But by explaining to folks that there are income driven or income opportunities in entrepreneurship regardless of immigration status, that can allow someone at the very beginning of like their career trajectory, their college trajectory, their high school trajectory, to maybe begin rethinking what careers can look like in the entrepreneurship field. And so I'll give an example because I think that can help clarify everything I just said. Is a student can be like, I want to be a teacher. Like, I want to teach my community. I want to give back. But they won't be able to be certified as a teacher if they're undocumented. They won't be able to work in a New York City public school if they're undocumented. So what does it look like? It doesn't mean how do I get on that payroll. It means how do I still learn about education, learn about curriculum development, learn about workshop presentation, learn about like these models of learning, and instead be contracted by a nonprofit to give like after school classes or be contracted by a private high school to work as a substitute teacher there. Like those are viable opportunities if for undocumented students because they're entrepreneurship based. And that one, like there's like labor laws that I won't go into, but essentially those opportunities don't require an e-verify form or an I-9, and that's why it's viable for undocumented students. The second thing, but I think I'll tie it to this as well, is in order to get a business, getting an individual tax identification number is how you will be able to fill out the paperwork to get paid.
Mm-hmm.
That individual tax identification number can also help students in college access scholarship, access some stipend opportunities. So I think it's getting folks on that right away that can be helpful. Some students already have that number if their parents file taxes. The parents already got the ITIN number.
Right.
And so they might already have it when they're filing them as dependents. But I'm like trying to think what's the second thing that can help folks. But maybe I think the second thing that like just addressing misinformation on it is the differences in two types of statuses. So one is you're completely undocumented, and the other is your PRUCOL, which PRUCOL stands for permanently residing under color of law, which just means that the US government knows that you're here, and they often give you an employment authorization document. So that's DACA, temporary protective status, TPS. That also includes asylum pending, which is what a lot of folks are getting as they're arriving in New York City, waiting for their court cases. Other like deferred statuses like Cuban Haitian parolee, other parolee statuses. But basically, knowing that someone could have that status gives them access to a lot more health-based opportunities. So they could qualify for some state-based, health-based opportunities. They can qualify for in-state tuition with 12 months of residency and not have to do the whole high school situation. And they often get an employment authorization document, which means that they can be hired and put on payroll. So and so often folks don't know that those statuses, both students and educators don't know that those statuses have an additional layer of resource for students who would otherwise be undocumented.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
My follow-up question, because you are such a resource, but I also know that you show love to other people. Who is doing the work? Like, who is doing the work that you're willing to co-sign?
Yeah.
People, agencies, organizations. Like, who's doing the work?
Yeah, I love this question so much. So I would say I think first giving a shout out to the students who work in my office, because these are folks who are like directly impacted in so many different ways, and are the ones creating these resources and these materials that we then get to share across the campuses and across the state. And it's because of their own experience of like that they're informed, they had to navigate, they had to educate people, that the information is so detailed and nuanced. So like for sure, like a shout out to the fellows in my office and the student workers in my office. And then also folks like Daniela Alulema, who is going to be the director for the Immigrant Student Research and Resource Center at City College, is the longer name. So that's one of the Immigrant Student Success Centers I've been referring to. Denise Vivar, who is the specialist now at John Jay's Immigrant Student Success Center. Jesus Perez, who is the director of the Immigrant Student Success Office at Brooklyn College. So these are the folks, like the three folks leading the way, right? Like they're developing the centers at CUNY. They're giving like models to other campuses to develop their centers. And so like keeping that in mind, I think to President Carol Mason at John Jay, students like advocated for the center at John Jay, the first one, and she put the money behind it. Like she's like, we're going to fundraise, we're going to make this happen. Having no other model or example of this, right? Like it was the first in the state of New York. So she like put her like effort behind it. And so similarly, President Michelle Anderson at Brooklyn and President Vincent Perdeau, and those are kind of like, I can like name other CUNY folks, but I also want to name like some nonprofit spaces that are doing this type of work. So the New York State Youth Leadership Council is a nonprofit organization in the state of New York. It's the first undocumented youth-led organization in the state. I'm often like, as folks refer to my resources, I'm referring to their resources. Like they have an undocu grad guide that's like so holistic. They have like how to work as a non-citizen that I tell students to look at all the time. They have videos. They do meetups with undocumented students. They just had a meetup at BMCC of high school undocumented students and their educators. That's like excellent. And then other spaces as well. Undocu Professionals, they have a Instagram account. And so these, like their network is incredible. They have a like jobs listing that is that essentially it's catered and targeted for undocumented folks. So it's not like you have to have a employment authorization document. These are independent contracting opportunities, or these are organizations that know how to navigate hiring you regardless of immigration status. And so I think that has led folks to understand how to apply for job opportunities in a more holistic way. President's Alliance on Immigration, on Higher Education and Immigration, also they provide guidance for higher education institutions on like how to provide non-wage opportunities, how to provide experiential learning opportunities. I'm like, I have so many. I'm like, so I don't know at what point you want me to
I'm
stop.
loving
Like
these
so
because,
many.
like, I like none of these did I know
Mm,
of. So I think what we'll try to do is once we go back over this wonderful interview, we're gonna try to give you guys these so that if you're working with a student and you have a student who might be even an alumni that comes back to you, or if you're in the higher education setting and you want to set your students who are close to graduating and they need support, we're gonna share these because right, we don't hoard information out here. We
no.
we give it all away. So we're definitely going to make sure we share those back. But if you know of any others, please send them our way and we will definitely share with our audience. But we have
Yeah.
one more question we want to
Yes.
ask you, right? If you had a magic wand, right, and you were able to craft and enact any policy, right, that helps make any change for undocumented students, like what would it be, right? Like what would it need to have um, to be viable for for our undocumented population?
Um. So when you say magic wand, you mean like
You do what you
literally?
want. The world is
Literal.
your oyster. You get to
Mm.
go ham.
I've been I was asked this question recently, and it's like it's a pathway to citizenship. It's getting rid of borders. Like it's like these like arbitrarily lines like drawn on the sand, like literally drawn on the sand, like across like reservations, like Dina and Navajo reservations across like migration patterns for animals. Like these are arbitrary lines that are drawn, is what has set up this idea of like exclusivity to a space, right? And because of that, there's exclusivity on who gets to stay and be a part of this space. And so I know I like my work and my position is about how to support students in their access to higher education. And I scholarship money can be provided like to the point where everyone gets to go to college for free. Tuition can be free, but students will still be under threat of deportation. Students will still be unable to like contribute how they want to contribute in this society, to support their family members, to feel like they don't have to prepare for like a worst case scenario where they might have to leave or might be deported. So it has to be citizenship for all. Like there's without that, everything else is still impacted by threats to their livelihood and threats to their safety.
Mm,
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And that's that on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is that on that. Thank you so much, Dr. Carvajal, for joining us, for giving us this insight. I think at this point now, right, this is what we needed, right? Like this is what we needed to close out the year, especially when we're thinking about our students, our babies are about to go off to college, right? And we want to make sure that they're set up for success. And I think this right here, I think this definitely helped us to support others who are doing the work. Want to help these young people actually realize their goals in a very real way. So thank you
Yeah.
so very much.
So
Anything
very much.
you want to add?
Yes, beyond Amber's words of thank you, I am hoping for Amber that she like really caps like she really does well financially because she's gonna provide a thank you via a boba gift card. Amber, you got that boba gift card, and
You can't make that promise lightly. I think
no,
of boba and I'm like, where's I have to go get one now.
She's like, wait,
oh,
now.
I'll put this on Amber because Amber's gonna make the big bucks this year.
Oh, I
You
definitely,
know,
no,
it's
I
only
definitely need to, because this is one of the ones that we were really hoping to get somebody who is as well versed as you are on this topic, because like at the end of the day, as professionals, we want to give the right information and we
Yeah.
want to make sure we
yes,
inform our community in the way that they need to be. We've both been impacted by both the undocumented and the immigrant status in
Yeah.
our families, and so we want to
yes.
get this right for them. So thank you so much for being here. We so
Yes.
appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. Your thoughtful questions. It was so good. I hope I didn't go too deep in the nuance of it.
No, you needed to, because
it's so much. It's
that's
so
the
much.
information we don't have.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so much on the surface that we miss what's underneath it.
Yeah.
Yes, really quick. Where can you be followed if people wanted to reach out to you because they wanted more information? And like, where
Yes.
should they reach out to you?
Yes. So folks can reach out to me. All of this information that I talked about is on our website, which is cuny.edu/immigrant. So very easy to remember, cuny.edu/immigrant. Folks can reach me at my email. And so that's my first name and my last name. So Cynthia Carvajal at cuny.edu. And I'm also on LinkedIn. Yeah. So folks can follow me.
Yes,
But for LinkedIn, you might have to put my middle name too, because there's a lot of Cynthia Carvajales. So it would be Cynthia Nayeli Carvajal. Yeah. So
There you go.
Yeah.
Amber, you can't pronounce that either. You can't pronounce that Nayeli. I'm gonna get back to my Spanish and correct pronunciations. Dr. Carvajal, you have been amazing. It's all right. It's all right.
I feel like you can pronounce it, Amber. I believe you.
Nayeli. Sir, I'm from the Bronx.
I get it. I get it. You kind of nasally with it, but we're on track with all my people. We are done for the night, Dr. Carvajal. Thank you. We're out of here.
Thank you.
A mess.